I was very positively surprised listening to you to realize that you talked about different elections in your different countries, but you have not mentioned the issue of ethnic involvement, ethnic belonging in the process of the electoral. Does it mean that, okay, we're getting now more and more away from this ethnic and regional reaction, backing our candidates from our different tribes? Or do you think that we're heading now towards the idea of nation and not the idea of identifying the different candidates as our regional brothers or cousins or whatever? This is the first question I would like. The second question is related to Somalia. When you talk about presidential elections in Somalia, are you, because I don't see, is it talking about the frontiers of Somalia? I hear about Puntland, I hear about Somaliland. What are you talking about exactly? What is the Somalia in it? I don't know. Is it Puntland? Is it Somaliland? Can you just tell me a little bit about it?
Somalia is a federal government. It has a federal system. So Puntland is a region that is semi-autonomous, but it still comes under Somalia. There's one Somalia. Somaliland is another region that is seen to be part of the federal system, but doesn't see itself that way. It wants to gain independence. It wants to not be part of Somalia. And then you have Jubaland and Galmudug. So the country is actually being Balkanized. Some people would speak about federalism, but what I am observing is actually clan balkanization of Somalia, which is going to lead the country into being balkanized into 18 regions. And that in itself is going to be a big problem, because if each clan claims to have a region, to do so it would need to ethnically cleanse some of the people in those regions to be able to say they're the dominating clan. And so we still have a central government which is based in Mogadishu, but doesn't actually function. If the president wants to actually go to one part of Mogadishu, he has to call Halane, where you have the African Union troops to come and get him to go there. So even though I speak about Puntland, I speak about all these different regions, Somalia still has a centralized government in Mogadishu. And so what is happening is, although we speak about federalism, we're actually talking about clans breaking into smaller units and claiming certain parts of the country because they now understand that in order for you to gain independence or to become semi-autonomous, you need to have a region. And that is why you find most of the marginalized clans being ethnically cleansed from their land, so that these bigger clans, and I'm speaking about the 4 clans, so that they can take over control and claim that part as their region. I don't know if that answers.
No, it answers.
Yeah. And I want to say, and interestingly enough, even though we talk about federalism in Somalia, Puntland has its own president. Jubaland has its own president. Somaliland has its own president, Galmudug, and all these other regions will have presidents. Now imagine, it's hard enough dealing with one Somalia. Imagine dealing with 18. So that is really a very tricky situation, and I hope we will be able to stop that. Otherwise, Somalia as we know it will no longer exist.
As a nation.
As a nation, yeah.
Okay. Joe.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The question on the ethnicity. Yeah. Let me talk with reference to Anglophone Africa that I'm very familiar with, not Francophone. Yes, in some countries, for instance, Kenya, the ethnic question is very, very important in politics. citizens vote based on ethnic lines. In the context of Ghana, no. Because the constitution makes it very difficult for you. If you want to run on ethnic lines, you will not succeed. One, your party must have a national character. The party should have regional offices, district offices all across the length and breadth of Ghana. Good. So at the national level, the ethnic question is very mute. At the grassroots, when people are running for office, soil of these people, they want a son from one of their own, then that is where it becomes very important. But at the national level, no. I'll give you an example. In the last December campaigns, President John Dramani Mahama, he's from northern Ghana. He went to the north campaigning that he's a son of the north. He should be voted for. They rejected him. You look at the poll data, the opposition performed better in the north than they did last time around. So in the context of Ghana, ethnicity being politicized at the national level, no. And the Ghanaian elites, they shy away from discussing ethnicity as something that you want to explore politically. But it's something indirectly, it's also there. For instance, there's something they call balancing the presidential ticket. So if you have a presidential candidate that is from southern Ghana, the running mate will come from northern Ghana. If you have a presidential candidate who is a Muslim, the running mate will be a Christian. Okay. They call it balancing the ticket. But in effect, it's trying to address this ethnic question so that everybody will feel that they are part and parcel of the government. And when a cabinet is being formed, the president is mandated to get his cabinet ministers from across Ghana. So you cannot have a cabinet that is packed by one ethnic group. No. So in the context of Ghana, it's more to do with constitutional engineering. But elsewhere in Africa, like I said, in the context of Kenya, yeah, Uganda,
even Nigeria.
Nigeria, you see these things play out, but it's something. But in the context of Ghana, again, we have to emphasize history here, and we have to give credit to President Nkrumah that he attempted to build a nation state. Because Nkrumah, through the boarding school system, brought Ghanaians from all manner of ethnic groups stay together. Then, the recognition of ethnic diversity and celebrating it is something that is, in the Ghanaian context, prominent, that people are comfortable relating to other people. Elsewhere in Africa, you see the difficulty ethnic groups find. Yeah. Here again, we in the context of Ghana having experienced this large-scale ethnic violence. If there is violence, it's to do with chieftaincy. That people contesting chiefly authorities fighting, but within the same ethnic group. But inter-ethnic conflicts that we've seen across the continent in Ghana, we haven't seen those on large scale, on one that is very violent with people losing their lives. No, it's to do with contests for chiefly powers and family members fighting. In the case of Yendi, where in Gabon, from the same family, they started fighting amongst themselves, but we haven't had that. Yeah. I don't know if I've answered your question. Thank you.
Yeah,
And Liberia.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Liberia, I think, as I mentioned, I think it's really a race. It's a race about issues at the national level, as it is even at the legislative level. And I'll give you an example. So the Liberty Party is a party that's been regionally entrenched in Grand Bassa County, and they've had that as a base for the past 12 years or so. Now the Liberty Party has been able to encroach upon other quote unquote ethno-regional bases of other people in the past in the senatorial race, where they were able to get, I think, 4 or 5 additional seats in the Senate, because they've been able to show that they are the party that delivers. And so when you hear politicians talk, they're pitching to the bread and butter issues. They're saying, I'm going to fix the economy. I'm going to use agriculture is going to be the breadbasket of Liberia again. The rule of law. I'm fighting on an anti-corruption ticket. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a technocrat. I bring with me these skills to fix the country, to transform the country, to transform it in such a way that President Sirleaf didn't. So I think it's less so people relying on those ethno-regional bases or sort of because I think the electorate is much more astute than they were in 2005. I think they're demanding more than they did in 2005. I think they understand the issues much better than they did in 2005, and they've seen what relying on ethno-regional bases can do in terms of going astray and not really serving their interests. So I think there's been a turn.
I just wanted to ask a very general question about the role of the international community and international observers. I'd be very interested to hear what the panel think about their role and whether they're welcome or not, whether they assist the process or whether they simply validate the holding of the election.
Robtel, would you like to go first? Or is that unfair?
No, I don't. It's funny. A friend of mine is in the audience. I'm not going to embarrass him, but he served as an electoral observer in Liberia a few times. So I don't know if he wants to say anything about his experience. But I think one of the things that troubles me at times is the sort of proclamation that elections in certain parts of the continent are free and fair. When in actuality, sometimes they're not. And I think sometimes international observers, I don't know if they're too tentative or afraid or bound by certain mandates that they have from their funders to actually say, no, there are actually discrepancies and we need to investigate those. As sort of a Band-Aid to say, you know, we're done with that. That's you know, that election is okay. And I think that causes problems amongst sort of the local political parties who do contest and say, no, there are actual discrepancies that we saw with our very own eyes. Electoral observers aren't everywhere spread across the country. They may go to specific places where perhaps these discrepancies may not necessarily be as glaringly obvious as other places. So when you put that stamp of approval, free and fair, I tend to question what that actually means. Particularly for the electorate, for the people who are actually going through the process of voting, and then those who may contest the results.
George.
Thank you. You know, observers behave like diplomats. Their language is so refined. Okay. Sometimes when they see the evidence that everything is wrong with the system, but they'll still go ahead and write their report and put it free and fair. Okay, yeah. But more importantly, their presence is good because it adds credibility to the system. And for sub-Saharan Africa, democracy is a learning experience, it's a journey. And to have international observers there and observing the process and documenting it, for me, yes, it's good. But as to the language, which you constantly is free and fair, is a challenge here. Yeah, but their presence is welcome. Because in 2012 in Ghana, the AU Observer Mission led by former president of Nigeria, General Obasanjo, the opposition had alerted that there was somewhere in cantonments where they suspected that the incumbents were manipulating the results. So the opposition approached President Obasanjo and asked that they suspected that facility there manned by South Africans, there's something wrong, and they wanted to. You know, he was not very diplomatic. His comments were in support of the incumbent, of course. One would expect a former general to talk that way, what he said, but the opposition were not too happy with that. Okay, that is just an example. But others have always come and observed, and yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's a difficult question to answer, honestly. I don't see whether they come or they don't come. We can't measure what I'm trying to say. We can't measure their impact. Of course, immediately they come and observe, the opposition will cry that, yeah, it wasn't free and fair. And for the opposition in Africa, there is always one thing. It's never free and fair. It's only when they are winning.
Like Donald Trump, though.
Okay, it's never free and fair. It's only when they are winning then. Because the Ghanaian opposition, you follow the electioneering campaign, how the Electoral Commission was vilified in public and all that. But immediately she declared them as winners. When they interviewed them, they said, yes, oh, she's done her work very well. Okay. But if they lost, it would be something else. Yeah.
But not a lot of international election observation for this election, is there? But there is an awful lot of international observation of a different type and presence,
yes,
which I'm sure you would like to comment on.
I actually saw 2 observers from the European Union in Nairobi. I don't know whether they're still in Mogadishu observing, but it was, yeah. So we do have observers, and I also hear there are some from the African Union who are still in Halane. I'm sure they have not come out of the fortress to actually observe what's going on. In terms of the role of the international community inside Somalia, I think, and I've been very vocal about this, I believe they are also adding to the problems inside the country. As you said, validating a lot of things that has become the norm in Somalia. And in Somalia, what I've actually observed is that when we speak about the international community, we're not speaking about one cohesive unit or entity. It's actually a group that is fractured along, interests and agendas. You might find, for example, the Europeans are keen on something, whereas the Americans and maybe the British are interested in something else. And then you have Ethiopia, which is very, very explicit in what it wants to see in Somalia and aggressively pursuing that. And then you have the Kenyans, and then there's also the African Union. But one thing that they have in common is the ability to conjure up progressive reports on Somalia. If you speak to the international community, they will tell you what is happening in Somalia are democratic elections. They even coined a verse or a phrase which was halfway to democracy, I think that's what they called it. And when I asked, what does that mean, they couldn't actually articulate or tell us what that means. From the discussions I've had with some of the international community members, one can say that they're very tired. They're actually burned out. And they will tell you that the clan-based system is the only viable system in Somalia, despite it being unconstitutional, because this is all that Somalis are capable of. If Somalis are okay with the clan-based system and they are not going to have a fresh conflict, then that is fine, because that is all they are capable of doing. And so to expect them to have democratic elections is like expecting a 6-month-old baby to start sprinting. Well, no one is going to say this, of course, explicitly to your face, but that is what you will read between the lines as you speak to the different people in the international community. A lot of them speak about gender equality and that it is very important that we have the gender quota, the 30% quota, which should be really enforced. And interestingly enough, I was in the same hotel with the Electoral Commission, and they were very, very much against having the gender quota. And when I asked them, one of the guys said, listen, I'm so sick and tired of these international community members. The only time you see them is when they are here to talk about the gender quota. You don't see them otherwise. And I asked him, I said, why are you having a problem with the gender quota? You should be pushing it because you are clearly an educated man from the diaspora. And he said, no, I don't like the idea of, this quota, because it means that you give women the advantage to come into office and they should stay at home. Well, isn't the clan-based system the same thing, that you are selecting men based on the clans that they're coming from? The gender quota is the flip side of that. Then there are also, in the international community itself, as I mentioned, Ethiopia, which is very much pushing for the current incumbent to stay in office. And that's why they're even churning out policy papers to explain why it is important that he should continue being in office, because Somalia will not descend into chaos. And so really, my observation, according to my observation, some of the international community members are only there to tick boxes. They know how to go from Somalia to maybe the next duty station that they're headed for. Some will even become knighted, while transitioning from there. And so it's only about really making sure that their CV shows that they've done X, Y, and Z, which is very unfortunate, but then you get the same faces, being recycled. Like I met this guy who was in the international community. He said he'd been in Somalia. He was working for the UN 15 years ago as a junior officer. Now he is the head of one of the UN agencies in Somalia. So they come and go. The CV gets filled, but Somalia, doesn't progress. It's stagnant.
My question is centered around women empowerment. We have seen an increase in women political participation, but then at the same time we are seeing an increase in harmful norms, attitudes and practices towards women. So my question is, how then do we ensure that there are spillover effects from societal empowerment of women to household empowerment and decision making for women? Thank you very much.
It's funny, when I was working for the president, I would go to the different meetings she would have across the country. And I remember we went to a town hall meeting in which a women's rights activist, a very staunch feminist, stood up. I think she worked for ActionAid, and she said, what is an empowered woman? An empowered woman is a woman who works in the political sphere and then goes home to get beaten by her husband. Because there's almost a backlash against her occupying that space because it's a space that she doesn't deserve to be in. So it's all well and good that we are working on entrepreneurial development, that we are increasing the number of girl children in school, but at the end of the day, how do you get to the crux of the matter in the household? I don't think we've responded to that well enough. I think quite often what happens is, and this came up quite often in the conversations we had with men in these different town hall meetings, they would say, you're almost neglecting us at the expense of the girl child or the expense of the market woman. In the same way that I think in Liberia particularly, because there is a huge transnational force, lots of Liberians have moved back from the diaspora, in which there's almost an imbalance in our privileging those diasporas, whether they're qualified or not, and putting them in positions of power. And there's almost like this diasporic hegemony, in the same way that by increasing the quote-unquote empowerment of women or young girls, if we negate and neglect the young boys and the young men, I have a feeling that, again, that empowered woman is the empowered woman in the political sphere who goes home to get beaten by her husband every day. So, I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is, but there has to be, the top-down approach doesn't work. And I think it starts with sort of re-engineering our understandings of a woman's role and a woman's place in society as well as in the home. And that, for me, it starts with maybe raising our sons to be better human beings. But yeah, it's a huge issue.
George.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a very important question and a very difficult one to give you an answer. In the context of Ghana, it's something that we say Ghanaian women are very well empowered, okay, but politically they are underrepresented. In parliament, there are very few women. In public service, very few women. So what is the problem? For a country that is seen as a model and one that speaks within the African context, but when it comes to representation, it's a challenge. It's to do with some cultural beliefs, largely, of what the role of a woman should be. And it's a struggle constantly that you see. For instance, the current government, when they were in opposition, they did something that was very revolutionary, in the sense that they came out with a policy paper that set quotas for representation. Within a week, they redrew it. There were some safe seats that they say, okay, this seat is for a woman, no man should go and contest. But within a week, they redrew that policy paper. Why? There's so much backlash. And of course, it's the men that were making the noise and saying that we will not allow them. Okay. So it's something that is difficult, honestly. In my research, as study party activists, you see women who are very good mobilizing, finances, campaigning, doing all that. But when it comes to representation within political parties, it's tokenism. They are giving what they call women's wing. And the woman is made women's organizer. All right. Then you have a national organizer who's a male, but you have a women's organizer, so she can deal with the women. All right. So she was just nominated as a minister for gender and social protection. I interviewed her some time ago through a friend. Very active woman. She was a national women's organizer for the New Patriotic Party. She's still national women's organizer. When there was vacancy for the national chairman for the party, everybody thought that she would step forward. Then no, I said no. A lot of barriers, hurdles put on her way. It's difficult. It's difficult. So I don't know whether if I help you. I don't know whether I've made sense. It's a difficult question, like I said.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something. I think part of it is also campaign finance, right? So let's move out of the continent and look at the United States. The most qualified candidate ever, don't even put the women label on her, the most qualified candidate ever didn't win the Electoral College vote because of the same sort of misogynistic patriarchal order that exists across the globe. It's not just a continental problem. And I think part of it is women having access to finances, like campaign financing, and then having access to their own personal collateral that they can put forward in an election. And I see you shaking your head, but because you talked about the fact that financing was a huge barrier for you. And political parties, one of the things that I think was so interesting and important about the gender equity bill that eventually got sidelined was that they said it wasn't so much a quota, it was ensuring that women are in the leadership of political parties so that they are able to run on that party's ticket. And 30% of the leadership in a party has to be a woman. And that was struck down. And I think with this Democracy Sustainability Act, if you do have a woman at the very top, then certainly campaign finance won't be an issue for her. So it really comes down, and I don't care what anyone says, elections on the continent as well as outside of the continent are run through finances. If you don't have the money, you will not go anywhere. Elizabeth Dole in the United States showed that. I think she was running for the Republican ticket, and she didn't go anywhere because she didn't have the money.
Faduma.
I think I will just speak to the issue of actually representation because my two colleagues here have actually given you a very good response. That's the fact that you actually have a woman in politics or in office actually mean that that woman
Good question.
is capable of actually doing what she's supposed to be doing. And what I've actually seen in Somalia is that when women are chosen, they're chosen by clan elders. They're not chosen by other women. And so the elder will actually choose either his daughter, his wife, or the mother-in-law that needs to be, that he needs to get rid of. Similar like that. And you have people sitting, some of these women sitting in the parliament, and they have no clue as to what is going on. They're not able to articulate their issues. And so, does that mean representation is there? Does that mean the 30% gender quota has been filled? I think it's a sham. I'd rather not have women like that representing me and doing more damage than claiming that we have filled the 30% gender quota. Because what I have also realized is that there are some women who go against everything that we are fighting for and stand for. And through my journey, I've actually come to realize that these women whom we often assume not to be educated and who are religious fanatics or so forth are actually highly educated, some even from the diaspora. But their views and the way they view women are quite contrary to how we would like women to be viewed. And so really for me, I find that we are dealing with, we are actually marginalizing ourselves by fighting for women to be seen in certain places when those women don't even understand what they have to fight for and how they can fight for it. So representation matters. I'd rather have someone who can fight for me, who can articulate issues, and whom I know I voted or selected to sit there. If the women's movements would have been given the opportunity to select women who would fill the 30% quota, then I would really feel very confident and say, these are women who have been selected by other women. And so they're not coming through the 4.5 clan-based system. And so it doesn't actually make sense to try and put a modern structure onto an ancient system that actually seeks to subjugate, oppress women and expect it to work. And so, again, the international community, as I said, really conjures up issues without really thinking thoroughly through how that is going to be implemented. And so now we have 25% of that gender quota filled, but some of the women who are sitting in those seats are women who actually are powerless, because we need to train them, to understand what they need to be doing. We need to train them to articulate issues. We need to train them to come up with policies and so forth. And so that isn't happening, and neither is the international community or the UN or any other entity working on that. That's my 2 cents on the representation thing.
Looking to America and the new Trump administration, the United States has, over the last decades, I think it's fair to say, spent a lot of money on governance issues, including elections, in Africa. Do you anticipate that this will continue under a Trump government, or will he perhaps decide, as he has in other areas, to perhaps withdraw from that foreign stage?
And over this side, yes, sir.
Thank you. David Harris from the University of Bradford. The first thing is I should come clean, because I am the friend that Rob Tubbs was talking about, who's done the election monitoring missions. I have to be sceptical myself. An academic, so I have to be. And I think we can look at monitoring missions and wonder about the efficacy of them. First of all, in terms of quality, some of the missions are better quality than other ones, and I would question some of them. And certainly some of the staff that go, not staff, the people who are invited to go on them aren't always as knowledgeable as they might be. But I think on a wider issue, I'd also wonder about whether the wisdom of actually having outsiders come in to judge elections. So all those things go on in my head a lot of the time. But I think in response to what Robert was saying, I think they are on a tightrope, because if they come out and say that such and such an election is free and fair or not free and fair, they are automatically involved then in the process. And they can be involved in quite a considerable way. Because if they err towards the side of saying this is not free and fair, there are problems with this, that can actually stir up problems which maybe weren't there, or at least they were only sort of latent problems in the first place. So I think they run a tightrope, and it's very difficult for them to come out with a conclusion. Okay, if the election's gone well, that's not a problem. If the election's gone really badly, that's not a problem. But in those middle areas, I do actually sympathise with them to a certain extent. Okay, my question.
Thank you.
I'd just like to go back to...
Sorry, I didn't mean that. I
No.
thank you, that was a very interesting comment. I wasn't sure there was a question coming to you.
I want to just go back to the diaspora thing, because clearly in two cases here, Somalia and Liberia, you've got a big influx of diaspora into elections, and Ghana's not immune to this either. And I'm just wondering, nobody's actually said whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. So if you just, that's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we have reasonably shortish answers to these? We've got the issue of campaign financing. We have got the issue of Trump and governance expenditure. And we have got the issue of participation of diaspora in voting. Rob Tell, would you like to go first?
I think I'll start with the last. So diasporas have been pretty much a mainstay in Liberian politics, I would say in the past 15, 20 years. Ellen Sirleaf herself spent a long time outside of the country. I think they can help or hinder the process. Help in the sense that they democratize the space because they come from abroad, and they may not necessarily have the same kinds of political affiliations that those who are domestically rooted have. And so they force those who are domestically rooted to work a bit harder. They also introduce certain, sort of nuances or things that they may have learned outside of the country, but then they bring with them that sort of country knowledge that I think is really helpful. In terms of hindering, I mean, I gave you the example of the Alex Cummings case, in which he has gone on record as saying that he has U.S. citizenship, but has retracted that statement. And so there are all kinds of questions around his citizenship and his eligibility to even run. And I think that's closed off the space for people who may not necessarily have U.S. citizenship, who have the same sort of political clout, or who might be technocrats and entrepreneurs, who otherwise wouldn't be able to enter the space because he's already carved out that space as now the standard bearer of one of the major parties, the opposition parties, Alternative National Congress. So I think they can help and hinder depending on who they are and what they represent and what they stand for. In terms of the campaign finance law, I think in the case of Liberia, it's a problem in the sense that those parties and coalitions that are likely to win first, second, or third might be incumbent parties, might be parties that already have the political clout and the money and the wherewithal to run a very strong campaign. And so what you end up doing is that you don't democratize the process. You don't allow those small opposition parties who have very strong candidates to be able to benefit from that sort of campaign finance in the future and subsequent elections. And I would even argue that those are the parties that you should be supporting. Those are the parties that you need to give a bit more clout, because otherwise they would be completely silenced. So I think it's the policy that I have a problem with, and given that it's a post-war context, and the fact that there's so much censure around it by the local population, because their priorities are elsewhere. Donald Trump is a ticking time bomb. I mean, I have no idea what that man is thinking. He could, what'd you say?
I'm talking about an African context.
Yeah. I mean, his ban, Somalia and Sudan on that list, yes, he sort of mooted that he would do it, but nobody actually thought that he would actually do it. So I think in terms of his relationship with the continent, he may have a hands-off approach unless it has security interests for the United States. And in that respect, I don't think he's going to be different from an Obama or a George W. Bush. I think U.S. foreign policy in Africa is very consistent, and I don't really see Donald Trump straying from that very much.
Sure.
Right, thank you. Okay, let me start with the question you asked on corruption. Yes, corruption was a major issue in the campaign. That's always been. And before the election, Afrobarometer survey looking at measuring the perception of Ghanaians concerning corruption. A lot of Ghanaians felt that the regime was very corrupt. And it didn't help the president when it was discovered that he himself had accepted a gift from a Burkinabe contractor that won a contract from the government to construct a road. After constructing the road, the contractor bought a Ford SUV vehicle and presented it to the president as a gift, and he accepted it. The opposition used that. And there were so many other instances of corruption that were too close to the presidency to the extent that, yes, corruption was a major thing. What helped the opposition was that of all the things that they've said about the presidential candidate, now the president, there's not one single incident of corruption that you could use against him. When his government was in power, there was this government policy for government ministers to buy their official residence. He refused to buy his. Okay. So for him, the issue of corruption as a person, it could not be linked to. But for the incumbent, it was too close to the president himself. That he was so corrupt, his family was very corrupt, his ministers were very corrupt, and corruption is something that gets people excited. Okay, they are very corrupt, so let's get them out and get the good guys in. Of course, nobody's good. Okay, but they were able to do that. So corruption is a major issue. But the other thing that I need to add is this issue of trying to tackle it. Okay, that is something that all regimes have talked about and they are trying. Now he says that he's going to set up, the current regime, they want to set up the Office of Independent Prosecutor, because in the Ghanaian context, the Attorney General is the one who is supposed to prosecute, and the Attorney General is part of cabinet. So if a minister is accused of corruption, there's no way that that Attorney General will go ahead and prosecute your colleague. So what the current government plans to do is to set up an office of that. We hope that it will help. The issue with the Ghanaian diaspora, if I may attempt that one quickly. There's a huge Ghanaian diaspora out there, but they are indirectly involved in the political process. Indirectly in the sense that Constitution makes it difficult for you to, it talks about a physical presence if you want to run for office as an MP. So you need to come down and campaign. You cannot just live in London, get up and come. No, it won't work. Right. Then they are not allowed to vote. Even though there's a law that was passed several years ago, ROPA, the implementation is problematic. So Ghanaians in the diaspora still cannot vote, but they contribute a lot. And if you look at the two major political parties that we have in Ghana, the New Patriotic Party and the National Democratic Congress, the New Patriotic Party seems to enjoy a lot of support in the Ghanaian diaspora, because a lot of the people who left in the 80s, 70s left because of military dictatorship. So they sometimes, a lot of them gravitate towards the right. So they are able to mobilize about that. Other than that, we don't have any other this thing directly for them.
But is it a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a good thing. It's a good thing because they may influence their relations back home when it's time for election. Because if you are the one remitting money all the time, when it's time for vote, you can call your mother or father and tell him, vote for this party, because of what they feel that is right. So it's good. It's good. But going forward, I would prefer that the law allows them, anybody can, because currently the president wants to appoint people from outside his political party, people who have experience, and there are Ghanaians all over the place, but he cannot appoint them because the Constitution prevents him from doing that. Yeah. Finally, the thing about Trump, I like it. I want Trump to turn his eyes away from Africa. Yes, honestly, if he turns his eyes, no more America interference, it helps.
Yeah.
We will sit up and try and address our problems internally. So I'm praying that he turns his eyes away from us. Thank you.
The question whether the diaspora is actually good or bad, it can be both. And in the case of Somalia, the diaspora actually remits $1.5 billion US every year. This is what enables mothers to send children to school and to take a sick child to the health center, because you have to pay money in order to do that. It can also be bad because some of the people who have gone from the diaspora are actually people who couldn't make it in the diaspora. And so if you have not really educated yourself, you don't have professional work experience, have not been able to make money, and you are going back to Somalia to compete with the youth who are just graduating from the local universities, and you're competing for work with them, you're not actually adding much value. You are, on the contrary, challenging the existence of Somalis who feel they have been inside the country and who feel they have not been afforded the opportunities that people in the diaspora have had. And so there is stiff resistance to people like that coming back. And then, of course, there's the fear that you are coming back with a Western ideology, and you are going to come and infect the good women and children by bringing this rotten Western mentality with you and polluting the mindset of the people. So you have to really balance how you approach issues. I'll tell you a funny story. I was actually doing much of my campaign on social media because I wasn't able to go inside the country, and I wasn't able actually to campaign by reaching out to the people and telling them what I would be able to do and the changes that I could bring, because they were not the ones who were voting. So it was really mainly advocacy and on social media, and to see how a woman vying for the top position would be seen if she were dressed as she would dress if she were in the diaspora. I took a photo of me wearing flowing pants, taking a power pose. So the person who was taking the photo was actually shooting from. He was sitting on the ground. And I put it on social media and said, this is the next leader of Somalia. And there was a huge backlash. And the backlash was that, so now we are getting a she-male from the diaspora to come and, be the president. They had a big issue with the fact that I was wearing pants. How dare you wear pants? It is not meant for you, it's meant for men. But it's not also a traditional attire. Even the Somali man is not supposed to be wearing pants to begin with. And so really, the first thing that people started saying was that this is a woman from the West. She's coming from the diaspora and is bringing, a certain ideology. And the fact that she's wearing pants means that she, is corrupt, immoral. And that experiment actually backfired very quickly. But it was just, so that you can see how the diaspora is viewed with suspicion, and viewed also with fear, that when they're coming back, they also bring radical thinking. The people who commit terrorist acts or who blow themselves were mostly from people from the diaspora. So there's also that fear, from both sides. In terms of Donald Trump and his policies in Somalia, currently what we are seeing is are drone attacks in Somalia. And since he's already chosen 7 countries, which also include Somalia, I'm sure we will see an increase in drone strikes. Whether he's actually interested in elections or changing regimes, I'm not so sure. But yeah, I share the sentiment that Somalia doesn't need more drone strikes. we've had enough of that. We've had enough of violence for the past 26 years. And so if they cannot bring technical assistance and, cannot try and tackle the 4.5 plan-based system, then they shouldn't bomb what's left.
Could I just follow up? The reason for my question was really about concerning US federal funds for governance, which, however, how do you consider those? But it's a quite different budget, isn't it, to military spending?
Yeah. Well, USAID does a lot of development work inside Somalia, and a lot of people will tell you that no tangible results have been seen yet. And so, if you are asking whether such funding should continue, I'm sure there are a lot of people who would welcome it being continued, despite us not seeing any concrete results. Although I have a sense that he will cut funding to developing countries that would fit his approach to issues. And if that were to be the case, well, I don't think it would really, have a negative impact on Somalis, because they're not benefiting to begin with from any of those interventions.